have some information that will surprise you. For the past 15 years, scientists have been using cutting-edge technology to investigate your family history. We've been delving into your distant past, and we've discovered something incredible. It's time we shared it with you.
A long time ago, your family were on the brink of dying out. Yet somehow, against impossible odds, they managed not only to survive, but to become the most successful people on the planet. Come with me, and I'll tell you something that'll change your view of the world. It's the story of your family and how they conquered the Earth.
What if I told you that scientists have discovered a time machine, a portal that has allowed us to see back into ancient history? And what if I told you that for the past 10 years, I've been using this time machine to gather information that has been rewriting history, your history? And where does this information come from?
Blood. It's one of the world's most evocative substances. To many people, it represents the essence of life, a religious sacrament, a gift from the gods. But to me, it embodies the past. Because inside this tiny crimson drop is the greatest history book ever written. It's the story of a journey, the journey of our species, and each of us is carrying a unique chapter.
But it's only in the last decade that we've discovered how to read these stories, a window on the past that archaeologists could only dream of, a time machine hidden in our genes. My name's Spencer Wells, and I'm a geneticist. The adventure began for me as a young researcher when I was lucky enough to work with a special man. I've tracked him down here in Venice. His name is Luca Cavalli Sforza. Luca was the first man to realize that blood could be the time machine to reunite us with our ancestors.
Evolution is history. Biological evolution is a genetic phenomenon. So unless we look at the genetics, we don't understand our history, we don't understand why we are made the way we are made.
This is how it started. In science, every now and then a big new idea comes along. It happened back in the 50s. What if we could use blood to learn about our most distant ancestors? The question became an obsession for Luca. He gathered up blood samples from populations around the planet. Why? To build a family tree for the whole world.
We saw that we could reconstruct a tree for these populations. We didn't know what it was supposed to be, but it made some kind of sense.
Luca had made the first steps toward a monumental truth that everyone alive today might be related, but his results were still hazy. It's the 1970s, and Luca's out in Central Africa sampling the blood of the Biaka and Mbuti people. He had a hunch that isolated tribes could give him a clearer picture of our distant past. He was right. They could. It really was possible to work out distant family lines from blood type, and the key lay in the blood of isolated populations. Flash forward to the early 90s. I was lucky enough to be one of a chosen few working with Luca at Stanford University in California. There was a scientific revolution in full swing, and the buzzword was genetics. While everyone else was talking about the future, we were looking backwards into the past. Blood was the time machine, and we were time travelers. Soon, we were taking Luca's work onto a new level. 10 years on, and we're ready to rewrite history. There are now some 6 billion people spread across our planet. Not so long ago, our species numbered little more than 10,000, and their world was a single continent, Africa. Then, something happened. A small band left their African homeland on a journey into an unknown, hostile world. You are one of their children. Who were these people? How did their children come to populate the entire Earth? I'll explain more about how we know this a little later. We are desperately close to the answers. We're on the verge of understanding the greatest journey in the history of our species. And yet...
Listen, I'll be honest with you. I've got a problem. I've spent nearly 10 years checking and double-checking the details of this journey until I have complete and total faith in our results. And the upshot? A story that's, well, frankly, it's impossible.
If our ancestors made the journey I believe they did, they would have had to be superhumans. The speed, strength, and resilience required to conquer the world defies belief. And yet, there it is, written in our blood.
What do you do when 10 years' worth of work leaves you with more questions than answers? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I've made a decision. I'm closing the door in the lab, hanging up my white coat, and heading out into the real world. I'm going to retrace their journey for myself.
But my task is daunting.
I know the genetic results, they're supported by clear data, and yet I still find it amazing that only 50,000 years ago, the ancestors of all of us were still living in Africa. It seems like such a short period of time on an evolutionary timescale. Look at it this way. Humans evolved from apes, and apes first appear in the fossil record about 23 million years ago, a huge expanse of time. So compress it down to a year. In that case, apes appear on the 1st of January. Toward the end of October, the first ape men arrive, the first ancestors to walk upright. Amazingly, it's not until the 28th of December, nearly the end of the year, that the first fully modern humans arrive on the scene. And even more incredibly, it's not until the 31st of December, New Year's Eve, that they leave Africa to populate the rest of the world.
And by New Year's Day, our ancestors had made it to the furthest corners of the globe. But how could they have made such a journey so suddenly, so swiftly, and so successfully? That's what I'm off to find out. It hasn't been an easy decision. I'm not just leaving my cozy lab, I'll be leaving behind my young family too. But this is a big story, and I want to be able to tell it with absolute confidence. To do that, I've got to walk in the footsteps of our ancestors, to face hardships, to feel the elements that so nearly wiped them from the face of the earth. It's a journey that both terrifies and exhilarates me. First stop, the place where it all began, the birthplace of every human being alive, Africa. Our genetic time machine has revealed a small surviving tribe, the direct descendants of our earliest ancestors. Unlike the rest of us, they stayed on here, and I'm hoping I can learn from them why some of their family left to start the greatest journey in history. Come on, let's meet the family. Kalahari Desert, Namibia. I'm here to find an extraordinary ancient tribe of people, the San Bushmen. Our research shows that their distant relatives left Africa and set in motion the family tree of mankind. From them stemmed every color, creed, and nationality alive today. We know the fathers of mankind started their journey from here, but why did they leave? I'm hoping the few survivors they left behind, the San Bushmen, will help me solve this fundamental question.
So look at these nuts.
50,000 years on, I hear their numbers are dwindling fast. Soon they could be gone entirely. I'm arriving not a moment too soon.
Hello? How are you? I'm Spencer.
And my 2 children, they are boys. This is my wife.
Amazing. Do you want to see a picture of my daughter? This is her in her school uniform. What's her name? Margot.
I have to explain to them why I'm here. But how do I begin? For a start, what's Bushman for geneticist anyway? I sense this is really going to be tough for a lab rat like me.
I just want to tell you a little bit about why I've come here. It's mostly to find out about your way of life. I'm really excited to be here. You know, it's such a dream for me to get to meet the San people, the Bushmen. In a way, you carry a secret in your blood, and you can think about it like a family tree.
I explained the tree was just like the family that we all belong to. My family line is one of the small fractured branches at the very top, while theirs is the oldest on Earth, the biggest branch at the base of the trunk. I get the feeling I'm not explaining this at all well, but they're way too polite to say so. This is really quite embarrassing.
So it's a great privilege for me to come and meet my distant relatives and the people who give us a glimpse of all of our ancestors. So in one sense, we're all Khoisan. We're all San people. It's just that my skin is slightly redder.
We would like to thank you for the information that you brought for us.
This is like a dream for me. Everything predicted in their blood seems to be written in their faces. It's like looking at a composite model of every face from around the world. The eye shape of East Asians, the high cheekbones of Mongolians, the mid-brown skin that could turn darker or lighter. So how do I know that of all the people on Earth, the San are direct descendants of our oldest ancestors? I'll try to explain a little better this time. I work with DNA, our very own manual of life. It's in our blood, in every cell of our body, orchestrating our life processes. DNA is a ladder of just 4 linked molecules, A, C, G, and T, strung together in pairs in an incredibly long and complex sequence. If laid out, the DNA from one person would stretch to the moon and back 3,000 times. In our cells, this chain is broken into 46 bundles called chromosomes. Because of its sheer length, DNA is prone to develop small glitches in its sequence. They're called mutations. Everybody has them. When they occur, we pass them on to our children. We call these inherited mutations markers. As our chromosomes pass down through the generations, they carry these markers with them. They write our history. They are the source of our time machine, the way we can see back to our earliest ancestors. The markers I follow are found only in men, on their Y chromosome, the chromosome that makes men men. But of course, men don't travel alone, and the journey of man is the journey of everyone.
I was walking through the village and I saw that they had massive piles of these sitting around everywhere. We call them monkey oranges. And they taste pretty good. They're a little bit like papayas. But I thought it would be a good idea to use them to explain exactly what we mean when we say we're following genetic markers. This is a man at some point in the past. The thing that makes him a man is his Y chromosome, a piece of DNA that's unique to men. When men have sons, they pass on their Y chromosome to those sons. Again, it's what makes them sons. So if we imagine that this man had 2 sons, they would have essentially identical DNA on the Y chromosome to their father. So they would get his Y chromosome in effect. And if we imagine that they also have sons, those sons, the grandsons of this very first man, would also have essentially the same DNA. But occasionally, when we pass on these pieces of DNA, we get a change in a single letter in the sequence. We can call those mutations or markers, and that's what allows geneticists to trace descent. And I've represented this marker with a little strip of tape, a little black bar. And just like before, all of the sons of this particular man will have essentially the same Y chromosome, so they will inherit this marker. And in that way, the marker acts effectively as a badge of descent, a marker of descent from this particular man, and that's what we follow. Now, as we move further down the tree, most of the sons will inherit just that single bar, but occasionally, as we saw before, we will get a second change in the Y chromosome. A second marker appears, showing descent from a particular man, in this case this person, who has first that marker, which came from that person back there, but an additional unique change on his Y chromosome, which he then passes on to all of his descendants. So in the people that we're talking about living in the present day, in this part of the tree, they've got two markers. They clearly trace their descent from this man, but the first marker, remember, arose all the way back there, all those generations ago.
The San Bushman markers are quite unlike any others found outside of Africa. In the world's family tree, their branch is the first to split from the rest. That's how I know they must be the oldest tribe on Earth. And now I'm here with them, looking for clues to find out why their ancient brothers and sisters left this place. The first thing I noticed was their incredible language. They speak with clicks and other sounds totally alien to me.
And the word for zero? Kora.
They try to teach it to me.
And for two? Ta. And three? Lani. And four? Go. I can't get that for you.
Is this strange language a window on the past? Did our ancestors speak like them? Merritt Rulin, a linguist from my old university, Stanford.
Bushman is the only family which has clicks. Those kinds of sounds. None of the other world's language families have these sounds. So this is really what makes Bushman languages different from all of the other world's languages. There's a reasonable hypothesis that these clicks are in fact ancestral sounds which have been lost in all of the other world's languages, probably lost just once in Africa. And then the group which lost these clicks left Africa and spread throughout the entire world.
When I ask another colleague, paleoanthropologist Richard Klein, also from Stanford, he goes even further.
Speech is more than just communication. It's also the way you model your world. You can ask what-if questions. What if I mounted this piece of stone on the end of this shaft in this way, and I put a string across this boat thing, and I tried to shoot the shaft with this boat thing? What if? You know, that kind of question is something that probably requires language to be answered effectively, even if it's just one person talking to themselves in their mind's eye.
50,000 years ago, Click was a new and complex language. There'd been nothing like it before. But there were other innovations too. They showed me this. It's a spear tip finely crafted from bone. It might not seem like much today, but when our ancestors started using it, it was the last word in technology. The smart missile of its day.
In every detectable archaeological respect, meaning the manufacture of art, the widespread use of materials like bone and ivory and shell, the burial of the dead with ceremony or with ritual. In every detectable archaeological respect, after 50,000 years ago, you see this burst of creativity. There's a big difference in behavior. The form is fixed, and culture takes off.
Interesting. So they didn't use stone.
No, they didn't use stone. They used the bone.
The bone.
Yeah.
Because it's more efficient.
Yeah.
The arrows were finer. And
Yeah.
toward me. Yeah, you have more control. Great. So you just want to make it very round and very smooth.
Now we're getting somewhere. When they left Africa 50,000 years ago, the ancestors of these New Age people had state-of-the-art hunting technology and a brand new language to communicate ideas.
Now, how far back can I pull it?
You must be careful. Otherwise
Further?
it breaks. Can't hold.
Ah, one more. Going to the right.
But they weren't philosophers, they were hunters. Next, the Bushmen showed me how these new skills were used. Like forensic detectives at the scene of a crime, the San Bushmen read clues left in the ground and get inside the mind of their prey. 50,000 years ago, this kind of thinking would have given them an immense advantage over their competitors, anyone who couldn't think like this. Piers Letrange has worked with the Bushmen for years. He's seen firsthand the best trackers in the world.
If you look on the edge of the track over here, it's got a very, very sharp edge. Yeah. And that's basically their main thing, working, saying, okay, the age of the track. And then they'll take another
And how
sign.
precise can they be? I mean, within hours?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
These are the prints of a wildebeest. Now we're on its trail. A lion will wander across hoof prints without a second thought. If it can't see the animal, hear it, or smell it, it simply doesn't exist. It would have been the same for our distant ancestors. But 50,000 years ago, these trackers learnt to see into the past and into the future. The hoof print told them that an animal had walked this way in the past, and if they followed its tracks, in the future they'd fill their bellies. According to Merritt Rulin, hunting was only the beginning of the advances made possible by language.
Language is basically responsible for all human behavior, whatever it is, and these new hunting methods and the exquisite hunting methods that these people have clearly reflects advanced language. The advanced language is what allows people to do all of this extraordinarily complicated and complex kinds of activities. Its language lets us do an enormous number of different things, and hunting is just one of them.
Back on the trail, the tracks lead us to the prey.
If you look over there, he's lying under the tree there.
Okay, yeah.
You just see his tail swishing. What he's doing, he's checking to see where the wind is blowing. The wind is away. Okay,
so what are they doing now?
So this is what they would be their typical stalking pose, actually, sort of start dropping down, try and lower their profile on the ground.
The Bushmen are keeping a low profile, but unfortunately they never stood a chance. The two great white hangers-on yakking behind them blew it.
That's
So they
probably
figure
one of
that
those-
it's not even worth trying to
No,
get closer.
once you've been busted, you've been busted.
Yeah.
It's not going to be worth it. The element of surprise is gone.
Yeah.
Is there a parallel between what I'm watching and the skills our ancestors developed 50,000 years ago? I asked Piers.
Oh, absolutely. If you take it just on a basis of natural selection in its purest form, you look at every animal around, it's going to be the survival of the fittest. And to me, you can use the same analogy for mankind. If you didn't have the brains, sorry, you were left behind.
50,000 years ago, our ancestors experienced a quantum leap in thinking. But this doesn't tell me why they left. Were they driven out? Did they develop a newfound curiosity? I'm told the answer may lie 800 miles south of here, on the South African coast. Now this is a cave with a mysterious past. Long before the quantum leap, this natural shelter was a home for humans. Then they suddenly vanished. Why? De Kelder's cave contains human bones dating back 80,000 years. What were these early occupants like? I asked Royden Yates, an archaeologist from the University of Cape Town, to describe them to me.
That's the lower jaw. What's important is the presence of a chin. So this is somebody who would not be very different in appearance to any human being living today.
Dress them in a suit, stick them in an office, couldn't tell the difference.
Absolutely, nobody would give them a second glance.
They may have looked like us, but the people who lived here weren't as smart. These people lived here before the quantum leap in thinking. Royden showed me their tools.
You find blade-like pieces.
And these would have been chipped off a core.
That's right.
Central piece of stone.
That's right.
Chop up a bit on the edge.
And then you find over here other pieces which have a natural point. Now, better developed examples such as this could be used as a tip to a spear.
And these would be hafted onto some sort of stick.
Yeah.
Yeah. They are very crude.
If I gave you a block of quartz and a hammerstone, I'd challenge you to produce a flake formed like that.
He's right. I can't make a stone tool, but I'll live with it. Yeah. The point is that the people who lived here hadn't thought of using materials like bone. These are the kinds of simple stone tools that humans had been making for hundreds of thousands of years. But when did they disappear?
The dating that we have shows that Middle Stone Age people were not in this shelter after 50,000 years ago.
Something clearly happened there then.
Something clearly happened there.
Mm-hmm.
50,000 years ago. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? What was it that caused these people to suddenly vanish? Richard Klein thinks it's a miracle mankind survived at all.
It's extremely difficult to find archaeological sites that date between 60 and 30,000 years ago. Animal and plant populations crashed and human populations would follow. So it's not that there weren't people there, say in southern Africa between 60 and 30,000 years ago, but there were so few of them that they have virtually no archaeological visibility.
Julia Lee Thorpe, a paleoclimatologist from the University of Cape Town, explained how the drought would have caused a dramatic drop in sea levels, leaving this cave high and dry.
There was a very sharp drop in temperature around 72,000 years ago. And at that point, the sea would have receded quite rapidly from the site. So the site would have changed to a different kind of place.
What would these changes have been?
Well, the sea was retreating and eventually retreated to about 40 kilometers away. So this place would have become an inland site. And the set of opportunities that you see around you today, with enormous amount of seafood, which was obviously eaten, would not have been available. It's not possible to carry seafood 40 kilometers.
What sort of evidence do we have for these climatic changes?
Well, we don't really have evidence for sites underwater, or at least not direct ones. But what we do have is a great deal of evidence for global climate changes over the long term. And we usually extract those from very long ice cores in, for instance, Antarctica, and also marine cores off the coast of southern Africa and all around the world. We can extract little creatures. These are called forams, which are really very tiny. They look like little grains of sand. But there's a great deal of information that's locked up in these little creatures. They're made out of calcium carbonate, and we can measure the oxygen and the carbon isotopes. And from that has been extracted a sea level curve for the last couple of 100,000 years. And that tells us a lot about what sea levels were doing and what the ice caps at the North Pole and the South Pole were doing.
Between 70 and 50,000 years ago, those ice caps were expanding. We're talking about a worldwide catastrophe, brought about by monumental changes in climate. The world was in the grip of an ice age. The polar ice sheets had expanded southwards, locking up much of the world's moisture as ice. Deserts in Africa grew, and sea levels everywhere dropped, leaving caves on the South African coast high and dry. Inland, lush pastureland turned to desert, and prey became extremely scarce. Hunters who once had easy pickings now found themselves desperately searching for food. Humanity was on the verge of extinction. Miraculously, some were thrown a lifeline, that quantum leap in thinking, which meant a small band could now think the unthinkable and leave Africa forever. Where'd the next human remains outside of Africa turn up? The Middle East? Europe? India? No. Australia. You think that's impossible? I thought so too, but guess what? That's where our ancestors turn up next, and no one knows how. There's no evidence of a journey by foot, and 6,000 miles of open ocean tell me that sailing was out of the question. So how did the descendants of the Bushmen get to Australia without leaving a trace? Maybe the answer's there. Let's go find out. Australia, the most remote continent on Earth. Yet after our ancestors left their home, this is the very next place where we find their bones. How did they get here, and why is there no evidence of their journey?
This is an absolutely extraordinary place. I've studied biology for nearly 20 years, and yet when I come here, I have to throw most of what I know into the bin. The animals and plants you find here are unlike those anywhere else in the world. That's because the last time Australia was connected to the other continents in the main line of mammalian evolution was over 100 million years ago. What this means for our story is that when we get to Australia, we find that humans are the only primate species living here. That means they must have come here from somewhere else.
Mankind had to be an African import. The most obvious route would have been along the coastline of southern Asia, but so far there isn't one scrap of archaeological evidence that they came this way. Neither has a trace of their presence been found in the genes of those living along the route. Something doesn't add up. So I'm off to Lake Mungo in western New South Wales. I've come here to try and find out if the first Australians really show up as early as people suggest. Apparently, many years ago, I would have been walking on the shores of a lake. This was home to an ancient people, the very first settlers in Australia. I'm looking for their remains, but if these rocks hold any secrets, they're not telling me. It's not till I meet up with archaeologist Doug Williams that this place makes any sense. Through his eyes, a barren wasteland comes to life. If you know where to look, the blowing sands of Mungo can reveal precious archaeological treasures, long buried and last seen by an ancient people.
Is that another lith?
Yep, that's an artifact. That's a flake. Yep. Yep. Sometimes you can get stone tools that have been used for scraping wood or something a bit harder. Tiny flakes will come off the sharp edge.
Mm-hmm. So what would it have been like living here for the people who made this thing?
Oh, I think it would have been a really quite a rich place to live. I mean, you look out across the lake, it would have been a fairly wide expanse of water. It would have been quite a rich environment.
Ah, looks like a bit of charcoal or something.
This is the remains of a small fireplace. You can see staining of charcoal in these darker patches and more generally through here. Interestingly, it has these small bones, and it's actually fish bone. Mungo is like this. A lot of the evidence we find is, we're quite personal and poignant, Someone's, a night in someone's life 40,000 years ago.
Yeah.
It's, pretty special.
We were stepping back in time. A community numbering as many as 200 lived here, eking out a living in this beautiful place. Suddenly, my lab seems half a world and tens of thousands of years away. But for Roy Kennedy, a descendant of these ancient Mungo people, this site feels like home.
When I visit this area and these burial sites around here, it's just like walking out to an ordinary cemetery and watering a grave. To me, it's very special.
But how long ago did the Mungo people live here? The distinctive colored bands in the sand are the key to dating any find. The red layers date back over 100,000 years, way before any sign of human habitation.
If you had to guess, knowing what you know about the site, what would you say?
I'd suggest in the range of 30 to 40,000 years.
It's incredible. I mean, it looks like it was done last week.
Yeah, well, certainly the bones are in good nick, aren't they? Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
They're incredibly ancient. The very oldest remains are dated to 40, maybe 45,000 years ago.
Having been here to Lake Mungo, I am convinced by the dates. Humans clearly were living in Australia very soon after they left Africa. And yet, this only serves to highlight the problem. How did they get here so quickly?
There's no evidence for a land journey, and a journey by sea? I just don't buy it. 6,000 miles of ocean is surely impossible. It's a long shot, but just maybe the descendants of those earliest settlers might hold a clue. The Aborigines are famous for their tradition of oral history. They call them songlines, and they tell the story of their beginnings passed down by word of mouth through the generations. Perhaps there's something in their songlines that hints at a journey. Roy from Mungo.
I don't know. That's a curly question, that one. I don't know. See, I believe that we come from here, and I think I will always believe that.
I've hit a dead end, but I've got the bit between my teeth and I'm heading north to Laura in Queensland. Do the rock paintings there hold clues to a possible migration?
Windmill. There's a big hill right out. That's why we got water out.
But hard as I look, I can't see any evidence of a journey.
From here, right.
And when I ask Greg Inabla Goodbye Singh, an Aboriginal artist from Queensland, he really lets me have it.
You mentioned with DNA testing that you've got now will trace us back to Africa. I don't believe that.
Why not?
Because if our stories aren't correct, if they are a myth, the way that you guys might believe they are, and we know they're not, why isn't it possible that the Africans actually come from us? We branched out from here.
Yeah. It's complicated to explain. In a way, what I'd like you to think about the DNA stories we're telling is that they are DNA stories. That's our version as Europeans of how the world was populated and where we all trace back to. That's our songline.
Yeah.
We use science to tell us about that because we don't have this sense of direct continuity. Our ancestors didn't pass down the stories. We've lost them, and we have to go out and find them. And we use science, which is a European way of looking at the world, to do that. You guys don't need that. You've got your own stories.
We know where we come from. We know about creation. We know we come from here. We didn't come from nowhere else.
This really isn't going very well. Tradition rarely sits well with cutting-edge science. The Aborigine songlines say that mankind originated here in Australia, no stories about journeys. But the blood of Aborigines tells me that they've inherited a very ancient marker from Africa. It's around 50,000 years old, while Africans have no trace of Aboriginal markers in their blood. The human traffic was strictly one way, from Africa to Australia. The big question is, what route did they take? 50,000 years ago, the Ice Age had locked up the world's water. Sea levels were lower, making Indonesia one landmass. Australia was joined to New Guinea. Since then, rising sea levels have covered up any trace of their presence along this route. If these first African migrants traveled this road, then their genes and the elusive Australian marker might survive somewhere. I'm going to India to see if I can find any genetic trace of the Africans en route to Australia. If I can, it'll be the first direct evidence that native Australians came this way. Let's go see if we can make history. Madurai in southern India. My mission? To try and find the missing link. I'm looking for the genetic marker found today in Australian Aborigines that shows their ancestors traveled through India on their journey to their new home.
It's incredible to be here, and it really is like diving into a sea of humanity. There's so many faces.
It's a long shot, but someone out there may be carrying the genetic link I'm looking for. To help me track down the marker, I've enlisted the help of an old friend, Professor Pitchapan. We'll use his lab and its equipment for as long as it takes.
Hi, good to see you again. Oh, good. How was everything? Did you come? Yes? It's been quite a while.
He took me off to a quiet cafe so we could talk. Quiet by Madurai standards, that is.
We've been following this coastal migration to Australia. So this is the reason we think that the Australians were able to get from Africa to Australia so quickly.
Yes.
Is that they followed a coastal route.
There is absolutely no archaeological evidence for the existence of ancient man in this South India.
Right. Let's get on the map.
Yeah.
Given what you know about the people living in southern India, which population should we sample?
Yes, there are many.
As we worked out which villages to test, the full reality of our experiment hit me. We were looking for a needle in a haystack the size of India, but Professor Pitchapan was upbeat.
Maybe after your study, it may prove that the genetic evidence is better than archaeological evidence alone, probably, right?
Well, with any luck.
Yes.
The following day, I set out to sample an isolated village west of Madurai. This is exactly the sort of thing Luca started doing all those years ago. These villagers are a prime sampling group. They've lived in this region for generations with few outsiders marrying in. The more indigenous and isolated these people are, the easier it should be to find the ancient marker. If it's here.
Name?
Rajendra.
And address?
Genes are passed down through generations, so first off I take a detailed family history.
Okay, age?
55.
And intercaste marriage?
Okay.
Mother tongue?
Mother tongue Tamil.
Okay, religion?
Hindu.
Hindu.
Remember I only sample men? The thing is, without the male Y chromosome, my hunt for markers would be virtually impossible. Let me explain why. Chromosomes come in pairs. We inherit one from each of our parents. With each new generation, the two chromosomes get chopped up and reordered, making each baby a unique combination of their parents. When that happens, it's bad news for me because I lose my marker trail. It's chopped to pieces by this genetic shuffling. But the Y chromosome is different. It doesn't get reordered every generation. Instead, it passes unchanged from father to son. and so do its markers, creating a perfect genetic trail for me to follow. But of course, men don't travel alone, and the journey of man is the journey of everyone. Somewhere here, 50,000 years after his journey, I hope to find the marker of the ancestral grandfather of the Aborigines. It feels good to be out in the field. Every sample you take, you can't help but wonder whether this guy will be the one. But the next stop is the lab. There, it's death or glory. You thought I'd hung up my lab coat? Well, so did I.
We've managed to collect several hundred blood samples from around the Madurai region. It's taken us days and days and days of work. And now we've got them in the laboratory, we've got a huge amount of work still to do. It's not just about collecting the sample, because we have to go through a purification procedure before we can get to the DNA and find this marker we're looking for. The first step involves getting rid of the red blood cells, the things that you might think of when you imagine blood, the stuff that carries the oxygen around your body. Then we get rid of the rest of the proteins, and we get down to a solution which is quite pure. We're ready for the last step, getting the DNA out of that. We want to add something to dehydrate the DNA molecules. So we add isopropyl alcohol. With any luck, we will see the DNA come out of solution. Looks a little bit like cotton at this stage. And there it is. I love this stage. I've done it thousands of times, and yet it still amazes me every time it happens. And it really is the essence of what we're looking at. This molecule is a historical document. At the final stage, down inside the solution, and snag the DNA, and lift it out. Voila. Pure DNA. And there we go. And ready to move on to the next step.
We store the DNA samples in a refrigerator to preserve them. So far, so good. Now we have to analyze this stuff. It's a 2-hour process. Then we've got another 300 samples to go.
We are going upstairs to the sequencing machine to load the samples on. And the idea behind this machine is that it's a bit like a sieve, a molecular sieve. And it's going to separate the sequencing reaction products on the basis of their size, their length. And by reading up a ladder of these, we can actually tell what the DNA sequence is, the sequence of letters in the code, A, C, G, G, T, and so on. Quite a high-tech machine, pretty exciting piece of kit. And it's right down here in this room. Power back up, because if the sequencer stops in the middle of a run, you're going to lose all your data. So you have to make sure you have power the whole time. And it's in here, in this room, protected from the environment. And here we are. The sequencing machine, that molecular sieve. Now the sieve bit is actually a chemical matrix that's inside of this tiny little tube, less than 1 millimeter in diameter inside. This is what the DNA is going to be forced into via an electrical charge from one end of the sieve to the other. We've got the data from hundreds of samples on the computer here, and now my job for the rest of the day and maybe into tomorrow is to go through each one of these sequences looking for the tiny difference that distinguishes the coastal marker, the thing that leads us to Australia. So it's going to take quite a while, a bit tedious. Sometimes I wish I'd done something other than science.
If the marker's here, it'll give itself away as a tiny spelling mistake, in just one of the 4 letters that spell out the story of our past, ACGT. I'm searching for just one accidental change in a sequence that's 6 billion long, from C to T. Is that it? Yes, a misprint of just one letter, but just enough, hopefully, to change history.
I've got some really exciting news.
Oh, good.
Let's
Okay.
take a look at it. I'll show you. If you look at this particular position, see that change from C to T?
T, yes.
That's the marker.
We've done it. This tiny spelling mistake occurred around 2,000 generations ago. It proves that our African ancestors did pass through here on their way to Australia. In the end, one man from a small village west of Madurai had the answer. It had been passed down to him from the very first humans to set foot in India. And here he is. One microscopic change rewrites the history of an entire continent. And that feels pretty awesome.
Fantastic. We should really celebrate.
In this case, the genetics is really leading the way because there is no archaeological evidence for a human presence in India until 30 or 35,000 years ago. It's amazing for me to think that as I look out on the subcontinent of India, that people are carrying this signpost in their DNA.
From Africa to Australia, and now, for the first time, the missing link we found in India. The genetic evidence of modern man's first coastal migration to Australia. Most of the route would have been pretty easy, requiring the same beachcombing survival skills learned in Africa. But there was one final obstacle. Even at the height of the Ice Age, the coastline didn't quite reach to Australia. There were still 150 miles of open ocean. Whether by accident or by design, they made it. A pivotal moment in our history. The quantum leap in our thinking strikes again. Modern man's ability to imagine a world beyond his horizons had taken him to the other side of the world.
Although we have no direct evidence for the methods used by these coastal migrants to reach Australia, reach it they did by around 50,000 years ago. And we have a clear genetic trail leading out of Africa along the entire route. But that only accounts for around 10% of the world's population. The other 90% took a different route, and that's where we're headed next.
The descendants of this second wave of explorers would become Europeans, Asians, and Native Americans. The odds of survival were close to zero. How did they make it? How will I ever make it?